Today, we'll learn landmarkers on chest wall. The contents of our class includes 4 parts. The first one is bone landmarkers. The second one is vertical line landmarkers. The third one is natural fossil and anatomic reason. And the last one is boundary of lung and pleura. The first section is bone landmarkers. In the anterior part, there have a lot of important bone landmarkers, such as supraesternal notch, manubrae sterni, sternal angle, upper abdominal angle, seafold process, and rib. In the posterior part, we can see intercostal space, scapula, spinous process, costal spinal angle. From this picture, we can clearly see the bone landmarkers in anterior part. The first one is called supraesternal notch. The notch is just above the sternum. In the normal condition, trachea is in this notch. The manubrae sterni is a hexagon bone at the top of sternum. It can connect the bilateral clavicular and the first ribs, and then the sternal angle. We can see the sternal angle. It can connect the second rib. It is a very important bone landmarker for cutting ribs and intercostal space. Now, this is the seafold process. We can see the seafold process is a triangular part at the lower end of the sternum. And then is the upper abdominal angle. It's the angle between the 12 ribs. In it, it contains stomach, liver, and pancreas. From this picture, we can see the bone landmarkers. The first one is spinous process, and it is just in the posterior midline. And then the scapular. Scapular lies between the second rib and the 8th rib. Then we can see that is the costal spinal angle. This angle is just between the 12th rib and the spinal. It contains kidney. In this picture, we can see the bone landmarkers on our body. And in this picture, we can also see the bone landmarkers on our body. The second section is vertical line landmarkers. In the anterior part, we can see the anterior midline, the mid-clavicular line, the sternal line, and parasternal line. In the lateral part, we can see the anterior axillary line, posterior axillary line, and mid-axillary line. And then in the posterior part, we can see the scapular line and posterior midline. The picture can clearly see the vertical line landmarkers. The first line is called anterior midline. The anterior midline is a vertical line just through the middle of the sternum. And then is mid-clavicular line. this line is just through the middle point of clavicular. And then the sternal line. We can see the sternal line is run along the vertical edge of the sternum. At last is the peristernal line. Peristernal line is in the middle of the sternal line and mid-clavicular line. In this picture, we can clearly see the anterior axillary line, posterior axillary line, and mid-axillary line. The anterior axillary line is just through the anterior axillary fold and run along the anterior lateral wall of the chest. The post-axillary line is just through the post-axillary fold and run along the post-lateral wall of the chest. At last, we see the mid-axillary line. Mid-axillary line is just through the axillary, the pecs of axillary, and then it is just in the middle of the anterior and the posterior axillary line. In this picture, we can see the posterior midline and scapular line. Posterior midline is just through the spinous process, and scapular line is just through the inferior angle and parallel to the posterior midline. Then the third section is the natural fossa and anatomical reason. From this picture, we can see in the anterior part, there have axillary fossa, supraesternal fossa, supraclavicular fossa, and infraclavicular fossa. In the posterior part, there are suprascapular region, infrascapular region, and interscapular region. From the picture, we can see the first fossa is just above the sternum, so we called supraesternal fossa. And then the fossa above the clavicular, we called supraclavicular fossa. And the fossa under the clavicular, we called infraclavicular fossa. Then this is called axillary fossa. From this picture, we can see the region. In the middle, this is called the scapular region. And just above this region, we call the suprascapular region. And under this region, we call the infrascapular region. And the region between the scapular region, we call the interscapular region. The last section is the boundary of lung and pleura. From the picture, we can see there has a 3 lobe in the right lung. It's the upper lobe of right lung, middle lobe of right lung, and the lower lobe of right lung. Lobes divided by the fissures. So the fissure between the upper lobe and the middle lobe is called a horizontal fissure, and the fissure between the middle lobe and the lower lobe we call the oblique fissure. Let's see the left lung. Left lung is divided by upper lobe of left lung and lower lobe of left lung. The fissure between the upper lobe and the lower lobe is called oblique fissure. From the picture, we can clearly see the boundary of the lung. And in this picture, we can also clearly see the boundary of the lung in lateral part. Pleura. There are two kinds of pleura. The first one is vesical pleura, and the other one is parental pleura. The vesical pleura is covering the surface of the lung, and the parental pleura is just covering the inner surface of the chest wall. The space between the vesical pleura and the parental pleura we call it pleural cavity. At last, we make a conclusion. In this class, we have already learned the bone landmarks, vertical line landmarks, and the natural fossa and anatomic reason. At last, we'll learn the boundary of the lung and the pleura. Thank you.